Leanne Lamb, and I am the Executive Director for Contemporary Asian Theater Scene, otherwise known as CATS. So welcome to the program with a conversation with the esteemed Director and Playwright Jeffrey Lo, and the Equity and also award-winning actor Jomar Tagatac. So we are so excited for you to be here. I just wanted to let you know that last month we had met with Jeanne Sakata, who's the actress and playwright of Hold These Truths. And it's a one-man show about the life of Gordon Hirabayashi. And for this play, it's all about the life of Gordon Hirabayashi. He is a Japanese-American civil rights pioneer who fought and believed that the laws that were created to intern Japanese American citizens were unconstitutional. And this was such an important play overall. And we had met with Jeanne. We had a great program with Jeanne in early July, just to understand more about the play and her approach and how she built it and how she developed it. Because right now, Asian American citizens are being attacked. And it's really important. We need to learn from our history. We need to learn from our ancestors and those who came before us and honor them and understand of how we address our situation today. We went to the performance of Hold These Truths at the San Francisco Playhouse, and it was outstanding. It was an hour and 45 minutes of riveting conversation and the portrayal and thoughts, challenges and fears of Gordon Hirabayashi. And at that point, we got to meet the two people that were also her artistic cohorts, Jeffrey Lo, who was the director of Hold These Truths, and the actor who was played Gordon Hirabayashi in the one-man play, Jomar Tagatac. So it is our pleasure to actually bring these two, the balance of the artistic team, to this conversation today. I am going to be joined today by our moderator, co-moderator. Hi, Jomar, how you doing? Our co-moderator is Reiko Iwanaga, and Reiko is a fellow board member of Contemporary Asian Theater Scene and a lifelong student of the theater. Welcome.
Hey.
Oh, hi, Jomar.
There.
I need to give folks a quick little bio because your bios are so long, it will literally take the rest of the program and we don't have enough time. So let me just go through a little bit and introduce you as I see it. Jomar, you are the lead for this wonderful one-man show, Hold These Truths, which was produced at San Francisco Playhouse last month and will be opening at the Capitol Stage in Sacramento later this month. You've appeared in San Francisco Playhouse as Mark in Art, DJ Loki in Today Is My Birthday at Theater Mu, and at ACT, you were seen as Mr. Botard in Rhinoceros and Bob Cratchit in A Christmas Carol. Your other credits include playwright and others in Be It Gone, which I have right here, and Fort of Us and Hamlet, George in Language Archives in by TheaterWorks. Also, you're actor 1 in King of the Yees. Here I go. All right. I'm a big fan, as you can tell, at San Francisco Playhouse, Kwong in Viet Gone for Capital Stage Company, and War of the Roses, Macbeth, Everybody, As You Like It, whew, at Cal Shakes, and The Happy Ones and Dog Eaters in Magic Theater. Jomar, you are a recipient of the Bay Area Theater Critics Circle Award for Principal Actor in a Play and the TBA Award for Outstanding Performance in a Featured Role. And you also have an MFA from ACT. So thank you so much, Jomar, for joining us. Yay.
Thank you.
All right, our next person, our artist, Jeffrey Lo. Jeffrey is a Filipino-American playwright and director based in the Bay Area, the recipient of numerous awards. Not all that work that we can mention, but the ones I want to call out was the Leigh Weimers Emerging Artist Award. And Leigh Weimers was a very, very big person in Silicon Valley as the arts writer, or just a community writer for such a long time for the Mercury News. You're also the Emerging Artist Laureate by the Arts Council Silicon Valley and the Theater Bay Area Directors Titan Award recipient. Woo. Among your many directing roles, I want just to call out a couple. Yellowface at Los Altos Stage, Viet Gone at Capitol Stage, and numerous shows at Palo Alto Players, Hillbarn, Pear Theater, TheaterWorks Silicon Valley. So that's your directorial side. On the playwright side, his plays have been produced and workshopped at the TheaterWorks Silicon Valley, the Bindlestiff Studio, City Lights Theater Company, and Custom Made Theater Company. Your recent play, Writing Fragments Home, was a finalist for the Bay Area Playwrights Conference and a semifinalist for the O'Neill Playwrights Conference. Whew. Now, by day, Jeffrey is the Director of Community Partnerships and Casting Director in TheaterWorks Silicon Valley, and you're a graduate of the Multicultural Arts Leadership Institute, MOLLI, as I understand, which is a big arts consortium and development area. Also, you're a graduate of UC Irvine Drama Department, and you're a founding member of Our Digital Stories. And maybe we can hear a little bit more about that going through. So welcome, Jomar. Welcome, Jeffrey. And welcome, Hi. Audience. And thank you so much for your patience.
Thank you. Thank you.
You.
Woo, excellent. Excellent. Now, so just getting into it, I'd like to ask you, what did you do for the last year? How did you manage yourself in this time of being inside and managing your work? All right, let's give it to Jeffrey first. I know that you're ready to go.
well, one of those things that I'll talk about in a little bit is sort of Our Digital Stories, which was one of the things that you mentioned in my bio. But you know, for the most part, you know, we've been really fortunate that there have been various theater companies that both Jomar and I have worked with, you know, Playground, San Francisco Playhouse, TheaterWorks, amongst many others that have been working really hard to try and continue to create theater and stories in this virtual realm as best we can during this pandemic. And you know, it's sometimes, I think there's been a lot of wonderful discoveries about that. And there's a lot of access that has been created through this digital work. I think that there have been stories that are told from communities that haven't always had their voices uplifted. I think we've been able to invite audience members from around the world. My play, Writing Fragments Home, that you mentioned before, we did a digital performance of that show. And I had family from the Philippines that had never gotten to see any of my work before that were teasing my mom about the sort of autobiographical moments in the play involving my mom. So that was just a real joy. So we've been able to keep as busy as we can with some of that online virtual work that, you know, obviously we wish that we had the option to continue to do live work. And luckily we were able to do that recently with Hold These Truths. But I feel really, I shouldn't speak for Jomar. I feel really fortunate to have been kept pretty busy telling stories as best we can. In addition to that, with the, you know, this moment of pause for much of us in the theater community, we've taken, many of us, I can't say all of us, but many of us have tried to take this time to sort of reevaluate and reassess how we create art, be it like, you know, financial equity, social equity, and then also just thinking with the racial reckoning with a number of different communities, be it, you know, the Black Lives Matter movement, the Stop Asian Hate movement, I just recently read about an unfortunate rise in anti-Semitic hate crimes that are happening. And I think that many of us have been taking this time to reevaluate how we want to tell stories, whose stories we want to put on the stage, and how we treat other artists. And I think that this is really hard work and work that takes a lot of time and self-reflection, that a lot of times it's easy when we're doing shows all year round nonstop for us to sort of say, we'll do that eventually. We want to do that work. And now that we've taken this time to like take a breath, I was really excited to sort of take this time to reevaluate with a lot of other artists. So that's a lot to just sort of say about the last 18 months, but that's sort of what I've been up to.
How about you, Jomar?
I think the word that sort of like gets me of what Jeffrey says is sort of a reevaluation kind of thing. You know, during this kind of pause, it's given me time to sort of reflect on myself, the work I'm doing, and how I can, you know, what role I play I can play as an artist in our theater community, specifically the Bay Area theater community. You know, I've been lucky enough to have been pretty, you know, fairly busy. You know, the art at San Francisco Playhouse was a virtual was a recording. We were able to go on stage for that and record there, but there was no audience. And Theater Mu, Today's My Birthday, that was purely a Zoom performance. So and like Jeffrey said, working with Playground and doing some of Jeffrey's plays too. But all in all, it's been, you know, it's been a way I've been able to like reconnect with friends. You know, there was a time where I would take a Saturday night call and talk to some friends in New York, and we'd get on the Zoom call, and it was lovely, you know, in this space where we're all scared and frightened and not knowing what's going to happen next. There was this moment of like, all right, on Saturday nights, I talk to these guys and we just play games, and it felt good, you know. You know, talking to my family every day, getting the chance to do that was something that is really special to me now, you know. So I feel like I've created stronger relationships through this great pause.
Well, you know, and you're right as far as streaming, and we were able to see productions from other parts. TheaterWorks did Emma, so got to see that again, etc. But in the meantime, not talking about the proximity of where you're recording from, but you two have worked together for a long time. What are some highlights? What have you learned from each other? Or what you gained from it, or something about it?
You're so smooth, Rico. So smooth.
Yeah, you know what's funny is I don't remember what year Jomar and I met, but I know that we met through Playground, but we weren't working together. I think we met each other at Playground when they were doing a collection of 10-minute plays. And I was working with our mutual friend, Rena Beth. And then I met Jomar through Rena Beth. And then we all became friends. And eventually, after a couple of years of sort of seeing each other, saying hi, being at like events together, and me watching Jomar and being a fan of his, we eventually, I think it's only been the past like 3 years that we really got to really work together, which has been great. But it's been a lot in a smaller amount of time than some may think. But I do think that the funny thing about that, so I would say, I think, is the first time we actually properly worked together Viet Gone. Is that true?
That, I know, I feel like there was something before that, but I think it was Viet Gone, like from like rehearsal, tech, yeah, like a full on.
Yeah. So Jomar had been at TheaterWorks for our New Works Festival and other things. So we sort of crossed paths and worked peripherally, but I think Viet Gone, which was in 2019, was the first time we properly worked together. But I think it's not surprising and sort of telling that people think that we've been working together much more and much longer than we actually have. Because I'll say that working with Jomar, I've said this to some folks before, and I think I've told Jomar this before, but it does feel very comfortable and very familiar working with Jomar and Rena Beth, you know, our mutual friend that I just mentioned. A funny story that I have is when I was talking to my fiance, and I forget exactly what we were talking about, but I think we were talking about just sort of the concept of code switching, and depending on which group that you're with or what you say. And I was talking in a certain manner that I talk in sometimes, and she had mentioned that, oh, that's I recognize that as sort of the tone and words that you take when you speak to the friends that you grew up with. And then there was a pause, and then she goes, and Jomar and Rena Beth. And I think that's very telling that with the two of them, you know, in the theater world, it's not often. I mean, you'll find people you love collaborating with, you'll find friends that you make, you'll find people that you really like, but it's not all the time that you meet other artists that make you sort of feel at home. And with those two artists in particular, I've always felt like, oh, this makes me feel like I'm doing theater in high school again, when I had not a care in the world and I was doing it just for the love of the art. So I would say that that's one of the things that working with Jomar and Rena Beth, even though Rena Beth's not on this call, but working with Jomar has done that for me, where I get like, you know, I was going to be a lot more nervous coming back into a live show out of the pandemic, because if it wasn't the fact that I was working on a show with someone who I consider a friend and family member, you know, at this point. So it was one of those things where like, okay, well, we haven't done a show in 18 months. We're going to have an audience for the first time. Do we still know how to do this? this is a one-person show where one actor is talking for an hour and 45 minutes. But I'm like, at least the person I'm in the trenches with is someone that I have all the trust in the world in.
Right.
Yeah.
Sometimes an hour and 54 minutes.
Oh,
2 hours and 5 minutes, depending on the like Jeffrey said, there's something that's I love working with Jeffrey because since we are friends, there's this sort of like short speak that we can get into. Like when Jeffrey says something, gives me a note or gives me a direction to go in, for the most part, I know exactly what he's asking for. I know exactly what he's going for. And what's really cool too, since we are friends, is that Jeffrey gives me and all the artists that he works with room to it always feels like a true collaboration. I always feel like I have a voice. Like if the best rehearsals that we have is not when one or the other is giving direction, when we're giving direction to each other, is where we're actually having a conversation about what is this scene really about? What is the scene about to you? What is the scene about to me? And then we come together and go, okay, let's see what we can do. Let's see if we can guide our sort of like perspective on what the scene is actually about in this way. And the great thing is, like I said, we can do it in a really short amount of time because we have sort of language together.
oh,
Yeah.
it's almost like
I have another story to that. Like I remember there's a part in the language archive where Jomar played George, and there's a portion of the play after George's wife leaves him the third time in the play, and he has this sort of monologue to the audience where although he's processing that his wife has left him for good, he starts speaking about his grandmother, who has passed away, and the language barrier between him and his grandmother. And I remember when we were talking about that moment and really the direction, and this isn't something that you can do with everyone, but I think if I remember correctly, sort of my grandmother passed away maybe 4 years ago. One of my grandmothers passed away 4 years ago. And I remember when we talked about that moment in the play, I just told stories about my grandmother and how I felt about my grandmother passing, but I gave no direct note about the play. And Jomar performed it, and he did exactly what I hoped he would do. And I remember Ev Shiro, who was the art director at TheaterWorks at the time, at opening night, she went to me. And after she saw Jomar's performance, she said, that part of the play, because she saw me, because I'm such a workaholic, like I went to my grandmother's funeral and came to work the next day in like a black suit. But it was very, very Asian of me. But like but Ev went up to me and she was like, that moment, I turned to Kelly and I said, oh, that's Jeffrey's grandmother coming through in the play.
Wow.
And that was just like all these different steps where all I did was tell Jomar some stories. Jomar internalized that, performed it, and then an audience member who knew me personally knew exactly where we were going with it, which is really a special artistic connection.
That really is.
Yeah, and just bringing it back to hold these truths and that part. Jomar, the parts that you've played, it's just it's huge, and you're sort of like the it person. You're the it actor. I don't know if you feel that way or not. I've just seen when I read all your bios and all the plays I've been to and seen you from afar. I was just wondering, for the role of Gordon Hirabayashi, you're playing, as I understand, like over 35 characters. You're playing a lot of characters, and I'm wondering, what kind of preparation went into playing this. This is, in your 45 hour, 50-minute production.
There was it was I should say, like when in the early times when SF Playhouse was talking about doing this, and Capital Stage was talking about doing this, I remember like coming off the phone and I told this to Jeffrey like seconds after I got off the phone and said, yeah, I would love to do this play. The next thought in my head was like, I don't know if I could do this. I don't know. I've never done a one-man show before. I've never done a one-man show where they were playing multiple characters And we had just spent 15 months away from the theater kind of thing. And so I was like super nervous. So I did what I sort of, you know, I did some research about the times and researched a little bit about Gordon, and really sort of, we also talked to Jeanne about the script and questions I had about it, and which that was where I learned a lot. And we talked to a few board members that had some experience. Their family had some experience with the internment camps. So all that knowledge, all that came together into, like, I brought all of that information into the rehearsal process. You know, I still remember talking with Jeanne. We had a rehearsal, like an evening rehearsal, and we were able to talk to Jeanne for a couple hours. And, you know, after talking to Jeanne, it's sort of like light bulb went off in my head. My computer is saying something about Adobe. I'm gonna have to cancel that. Oh my gosh. Okay, there you are. Oh, I got afraid of technology. Technology freaks me out. But
a true artist.
I was like, ugh, what does that mean? But I just remember her. The thing that I remember the most is her love for wanting to get Gordon's story out there, and the way she talked about Gordon and about how he loved to tell stories, and about how Gordon was this sort of light that you couldn't help but seeing him as this kind of light. And maybe she wasn't sure that he knew he was this light. He sort of just was. And that sort of unlocked the script for me. You know, there was this incredible task of being able to tell Gordon's story and actually playing all these parts that are in this story. But then I thought, well, Gordon loved to tell stories. So for myself to get into these characters, I had to be, this is gonna sound so weird saying this, I had to be Gordon being the character. And having that sort of centered me into like, all right, I don't have to like get deep into like the inner life of the judges. I just have to tell it from Gordon's perspective of his love of telling stories.
Wow.
It also takes, that was a long-winded way of saying it's just a lot of hard work, and also it's a lot of endurance too. It takes a lot of endurance to do a show like this, which Jeffrey sort of told me in the beginning, and I didn't really believe him until we got on stage, and I was just sitting like I couldn't breathe. It is like running a marathon.
It truly is, because there isn't a break. You're the only one on stage.
Yeah. Yeah.
And talking to Jeanne, I understand what you're saying as far as her purpose and motivation. So that's true. Well, if you were the it actor, Jeffrey is the man of many trades. You're a playwright, you're a director, and you also are the casting director and community affairs person at TheaterWorks. And so, and having won the Leigh Weimers Award and such. So would you like to comment on some of the roles and the Asian American aspects of that? And I will say one thing. Well, I'm probably dating myself by calling it blind casting. I'm sure there's a better term now. But I've always admired TheaterWorks with what you have done there. I remember is it Nick Nakshima was in Pride and Prejudice and things like that, or Emma, I guess it was Emma.
Yeah, yeah.
I mean, TheaterWorks has always done that, and ACT too, for that matter, with your roles and such. So tell us about the Asian American aspects of your approach to these things.
Yeah, it's something that we definitely take a lot of pride in at TheaterWorks, and something that, you know, as we're taking this time, as I was talking about earlier with this reflection, we're evaluating how to, the term that we're using now for various reasons is identity conscious casting.
Okay, good. I knew I was old.
No, but you know, as things evolve, and that's sort of, you know, to the point where we took a moment to think about as things are evolving, and, you know, as how do I say this? As we are working to be an anti-racist organization or an anti-racist group of artists, it's really wonderful to think that the work that we did, you know, TheaterWorks was founded 52 years ago. And it's like the work that we were doing 52 years ago was absolutely anti-racist. But what's so beautiful is the work became more standard, and people, the rest of the world really caught up. So now what we want to do is reevaluate, now that the world is caught up, how can we continue to then move forward and become and continue to be a leader and a leader for change and change for good. So that's one of the things we're really excited about. And so in terms of the Asian Americanness of my roles, I mean, one, Nick Nakashima and Emma, shout out to Nick Nakashima. He's such a joy and such a hilarious performer. And shout out to my mentor and my predecessor, Leslie Martinson, who, I've only been the casting director at TheaterWorks for about, I don't even know what time is anymore. The pandemic happened. 4 years, 5 years, something like that. But Leslie Martinson carried that role for, 25, 30 years before me and really helped usher me in and taught me so much. But, what's interesting is, with my roles as a playwright and a director, and with my role as a community partnerships and casting director, the aspects of being an Asian American artist and being sort of an advocate for marginalized communities sort of permeates in all of those things, regardless of whether or not it's direct. I remember one of the things I thought about, I'm going to go back to the language archive again. In the program note, I wrote a little bit about an experience I had with my mom, where that play is about a linguist who studies and saves and records dying languages, but he has trouble communicating to his wife at home, is sort of the elevator pitch of that play. And I remember going to my mom because I found a list of the most beautiful words in the Philippine languages. And so I went to her and said, can you help me pronounce this? Can you pronounce this? Can you pronounce this? And as my mom, I was getting recordings of my mom saying these different words just so I could share them at rehearsal and such. And my mom asked me, said, are you doing a Filipino play? And the Language Archive is a play written by Julia Cho, an Asian American writer, but the race and ethnicity and identity is not written into the script. It could be played by people of any identity. And I remember my mom being like, are you doing a Filipino play? And I was like, no. And then I thought to myself, and I said to her, I'm like, but I'm Filipino. So in a way, yes, every piece of art that I create is in one way, shape, or form going to be a Filipino play, a Filipino piece of art, a Filipino piece of storytelling, because as an artist, we end up putting pieces of ourselves into the art that we create. And for me, that's going to be the upbringing that I had as a Filipino-American, the way my parents brought me up, the way my siblings brought me up, the way I move in the world, and the things that I was surrounded by. So, I, in terms of the plays that I write, sometimes they're directly Filipino and sometimes they're not, but there's probably little hints of Filipino stuff in there. I remember I wrote a play called Spending the End of the World on OkCupid, which got a cease and desist letter from OkCupid. Oh. And we were opening at the Pair, a little 50-seat theater, and then I get a cease and desist letter, and I'm like, don't you have anything better to do?
Apparently not.
Apparently not. But there's a moment where there's these two people, and I don't write race or ethnicity into these characters, but they talk about how, I miss my mom's yellow peanut butter stew. And most people are like, what is that? But that's obvious. That's very much a Filipino food. That's a Filipino dish. That's kare-kare. And I just wrote it in there. It's like, whatever. Whether or not people understand doesn't really matter to me. And whether or not it's a Filipino person playing it in that role doesn't really matter. I mean, someone's mom could have learned to make that food, And so, and also with community partnerships, where I definitely try to make sure that I am supporting all marginalized communities as best that I can. But in terms of the connections that I've made up until this point, the artists that have supported me and the artists and organizations that have supported me and that I have gotten to know just by nature of being Asian American and Filipino American, that's what sort of finds its way to me the easiest, I should say. And the rest of it, I just put in due diligence to make sure I'm supporting as many communities as I can.
That's beautiful. There's been a lot written about you two, and I think only good. And there's one interview that I read in it was a San Francisco date book, and they were saying that theater was a counter to hate and fear, and that you both really supported that. I don't know if you remember that comment, but Jomar, would you like to?
Jeffrey has a really great quote from that article. that SF Playhouse loves saying it. Do you remember what that quote was, Jeffrey?
No, I remember Susie saying it though.
Gosh, what was that?
Well, I think what it was actually, no, you know what I think what it was that we were, was it that we were, a part of Holy's Truths and a part of telling Gordon's story is, of course, helping uplift his work and uplift the history of it, and to also honor the history of what the Japanese Americans went through during World War II. But I believe what they were saying was that for us producing this show today and now, especially given amongst the fears that the Asian American, especially the elderly Asian American community is experiencing right now, what we were hoping producing this show now was going to do was instill hope and give energy towards the people that were the equivalent of Gordon Hirabayashi today. The people that are, the Stacey Abrams of the world, the people that are, fighting voter suppression, the people that are fighting, police brutality, the people that are fighting Asian American hate crimes, like all of those people that have been working so hard and in addition to the pandemic and must be so tired. Our hope is that here's a story of a gentleman who, like you, stuck by his morals and stuck by his principles, and he kept fighting and even had to wait 40 some odd years, and he was old and he was about to be retired. His children were adults and he stuck to it. And here's a story of someone who actually won, and his fight meant something. So our hope was that telling this story was going to provide energy and a little more juice to those that were tired and needed a little extra love and deserved it.
Well, Leanne was telling me that TheaterWorks and all of you had some effective fundraising to support safety patrols in Oakland. Compassion.
Yeah.
Would you like to talk about that a little bit? That's quite exciting that you focused on a particular situation.
Yeah, so that was the virtual production of Writing Fragments Home that Jomar was in, quite literally playing a version of myself, and his mother and the person playing my mother was Emily Kuroda, which is very exciting.
Oh, nice. Okay.
But that was TheaterWorks Silicon Valley.
Gilmore Girls.
Yeah, a little bit of juice with Emily there, the queen. Yeah, that was a reading that TheaterWorks produced along with about 40 or so presenting partners, which was a really beautiful sort of show of support from the theater community, mostly in the Bay Area, but even around the country. There was, the Oregon Shakespeare Festival, Hypocrite Theater in New York. A lot of theater companies sort of jumped on board, and it was just a fundraiser. It was a fundraiser digital piece that we did, and although the reading was free to anyone who wanted to access it, you had the option to donate to a group called Compassion in Oakland, which is providing chaperones for the elderly Asian American community. It started in Oakland. They're now expanding to San Francisco and also the San Gabriel Valley. And they've started to provide resources for anybody who would like to start a chapter of compassion in whatever town or city that you're in. And we were able to raise $30,000 to support the work that they're doing. And what we loved so much about choosing that organization to work with is that it was as grassroots gets. As the unfortunate language around the coronavirus and the pandemic was sort of instilling hate towards the Asian American community, they just mobilized as quickly as they could. And they saw, over Lunar New Year, you just couldn't watch the news without seeing news of an attack on an elderly Asian American community member. And they just created a group where they're like, we're going to do patrols, we're going to do volunteer chaperones. And they just jumped at it. And it was absolutely the work that we wanted to do. And we were able to raise $30,000, which was really awesome and beautiful and gratifying.
That's amazing. I thought it was so creative how you created food tiers for rewarding people. That was so clever. That was absolutely fabulous. That speaks a lot to the vision of TheaterWorks, speaks to the vision that you had, and to bring this play forward. So thank you. Going to this one, Jomar, what can you say? Can you talk about the challenges of being Asian in theater right now, and how you've dealt with it?
You know, I mean, that's the challenges of being in, I don't, that's a big question. You know, the way the stories that mean the most to me. Well, let me say this. One of the highlights in my theater career so far was doing a play at the Magic Theater called Dog Eaters. And the reason it was one of the highlights, because it was a show specifically about the Philippines. And I was able to sort of bring my culture to the theater. And that had to have been one of the proudest moments that I've had. I remember, you know, I was charged with doing the, you know, the curtain speech at the end, you know, kind of thing. And my parents were there. And I gave a shout out to my parents, and my mom was so happy when I said, oh, and by the way, you guys, my parents are here. My mom, Marlene, and my father, Joseph, are here. And I remember my mom being so proud, going like, hi, I'm Jomar's mother, you know? And I was just like, yes, because I love theater so much. And I'm so grateful that my parents are super supportive of me in doing theater. You know, can be uncommon. You know, I probably should have been a nurse or something, and they would have been super happy about it. But, you know, I felt like I was giving them a gift. I love the theater so much, and they were able to see themselves in this theater piece. And I think I'm constantly looking for stories or looking for theater pieces where we can uplift voices that aren't heard very often. And that's sort of my task. You know, I realized upon reflecting during this pandemic, I thought to myself, and I've said this before, you know, the odds of me becoming a famous Hollywood actor are very small. You know, I don't know if I'm going to be in the next Marvel movie. I don't know if I'm going to be the next big Hollywood blockbuster. So what's next? What can I do? And what I can do is sort of inspire the generation that's coming up now. Inspire the you know this in those student matinees when high school students come see our shows and they do our talkbacks. And I remember one question that came from someone who was POC, and she said, "You actually do this for a living? You actually get paid to do this?" And I said, "Yes. And if you want to do the theater, you should. There should be room for everyone at the table here." I think growing up, we don't really think that there's room for us to be artists, because we don't see a lot of ourselves on TV or in the theater, and that's slowly changing, which is great.
Yeah, you're right. Representation wasn't there before, and now gradually there is. I remember seeing a theater production with Japanese actors, and it took a while to think, oh, they're actually on stage emoting.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Well, then, like San Francisco Playhouse, I noticed their next play is also by an Asian playwright. So is that
Lauren Yee's
suspicion, or I mean, things are opening for everyone a little bit more? What's the status of the situation?
I'll say, who is it that said this? Steve Martin. There's a Steve Martin quote that, and I promise this is going to be relevant. There's a Steve Martin quote that I might be paraphrasing, but it says, "Be so good that they have to notice you."
Good one.
And the fact, and so Song of Summer at San Francisco Playhouse is a play by an amazing playwright named Lauren Yee. And I will not give any credit to any theater company or artistic director for being like, oh, we put Lauren Yee on our season. Like, no, Lauren Yee is just so good that you can't help but put Lauren Yee's on stage. She is so good, but she's from the Bay Area and she's Asian American. So we'll take it.
Yeah, right.
Yep.
Representing for us as
Yep.
well. But boy, is she just incredible.
Yeah.
Which moves us on to how about you two, your proud moments? What are some of those?
Oh gosh.
Oh.
Proudest moments. Jomar talks about dog eaters. I have a beef with the dog eaters in the lobby. It's not a real beef, but there's that Sari store that had a lot of Filipino snacks and stuff in the lobby. And it turns out when I went to the preview of Dog Eaters, it was just an art installation. And I was so bummed because I showed up to the lobby and I had my wallet out. I'm like, oh my God, how much for the corn nuts? How much for the dried mangoes? How much for all of this? And then the intern was like, oh, this is just an installation before you go into the show. And I was like,
tease people about food, right? You cannot tease.
I was about to buy all these Filipino snacks for this show.
No way. You just have to go to your own Filipino store, Jeff. Right?
Shout out to Magat. Shout out to that family. It's community leaders. Proudest moments for me. What do you say, Jomar? You should go in.
I mean, I said that Dog Eaters was one of my proudest moments, but like, I don't even want to say like, yeah, I guess I should say proudest moments. There's another word for it. Hold this play. I mean, not because we're just talking about it, but this play, Hold These Truths, means it feels like what do you call that? A stamp, a pivotal point, a marker. Like I feel like Hold These Truths. There were a lot of firsts. There was a first time doing a one-man show, first time, coming back to the theater, after what this whole world has been through. And I think telling Gordon's story means bringing it out there to an audience to hear, maybe for the first time or maybe hearing it again. But people need to continue to hear his story about how he fought. And I think this story is so important that it has to be up there with, one of my memorable moments that I will not forget for a long time while I'm here.
Very good.
I'll talk about writing Fragments Home, which happened just before Hold These Truths, and being able to raise all that money for Compassion in Oakland. And for me, I think on a personal level and on a sort of selfish level, that experience for me of putting that on was a moment where I was able to sort of practice taking the space that I probably deserve more than I usually would in my life. I think, as we say, like, we're trying not to take up too much space. Maybe it's our upbringing. Maybe it's like the way we're raised, where we just try to keep our head down and just do our thing. But that was a moment where, like, at TheaterWorks, I went to our department heads meetings and I said, hey, this is a thing that's happening in the Asian American community. I can't stop thinking about how I want to make sure we do something about it. This is the idea that I have. Would you be interested in doing it? And also, can you just pay for it? Like, can you pay all those actors and we get no profit? This is all 100% a fundraiser. That's some
about it. 100% of that money.
That's right. Yeah.
Yeah.
And that's something that, 5 years ago, even 2 years ago, I wouldn't have felt like I had the agency to speak up and say that. And even in the revision of that play, Jomar's read prior drafts of that play, and there was a version of that play, in the autobiographical portions of it, it's about a struggling playwright who's trying to find their way in the American theater. And in the earlier drafts of the play, it sort of pulled some punches. It sort of pulled back a little bit, and it wasn't quite taking the space it wanted to. And there was a lot of things that I felt were implied and I felt were obvious. And then in revisions, I'm like, I'm going to make it clear. I'm going to make it clear that the reason this playwright feels lonely is because most of the people that they are working with and most of the people that are the quote unquote gatekeepers of the theater don't look like him, and they don't understand the stories he's trying to tell for reasons that have nothing to do with artistic quality and have everything to do with the fact that he's Asian American and they're not. And I sort of found myself in this place where I said, here's a play that has meant a lot to me for a long time, but has been almost produced by a lot of predominantly white institutions, but wasn't. And then we put it on and got such an amazing response, raised $30,000. I got to actually write the play that I actually wanted to write, that I was too afraid to write. And so for me, it was a really proud moment where I said, you know what? like life's too short to be scared to not do what you believe in. And so that was a moment for me to where I got to reflect on, oh, okay, this is what it feels like to take space. This is what it feels like to be Che Yu for a moment. Because boy, he just doesn't care. Che Yu is going to do what he believes in. And at the beginning of the pandemic, I had a really intense phone call with Che Yu where he was just sort of like, Jeffrey, what do you want to do with your life? And I was like, I don't know. He's like, no, answer me. What do you want to do with your life? Because that's how Che Yu talks. And I'm like, I want to be an artistic director. And he's like, cool. You answered it. Good. Now do what you have to do to get there. Mm-hmm. And so it was a really gratifying moment to be able to put that play on and for that cause and be that upfront, like that transparent and unabashed about this is why we're doing this. We are trying to support the Asian American community because they need it. And so
that's beautiful. Yeah. And just to that point, there are going to be a lot of people watching this and watching it now. And basically they want to be you. They want to be Jomar. They want to be Jeff. They want to be J-Lo, right? They want to be you. How
they still want to be Francis and Emily. It's okay. I do too.
What advice can you both provide for folks that are aspiring to be the best actor, to be the best playwright, to be the successful director?
You want to go first, Jomar?
I would say, I think the moment where I would say to embrace everything that makes you yourself unique, that makes you who you are. I think that's when things sort of started. I was going to say that's when things sort of started going for me, when I was starting to get closer and closer to my authentic self. I'm not fully there yet, but the process of getting closer to that person is kind of an artistic process in itself too, right? So I think that would be my advice. I think for a long time, I sort of had this idea of like, this is what it means to be the perfect actor. This is what I have to do. This is what it looks like. This is what I have to read. This is what I have to fill my head with, all that stuff. This is what I have to like. This is the aesthetic that people like. So I like that too. And once I sort of threw that away and go, well, do I really like that? No, I don't really like that. Just because everyone likes that, I like this. And embrace myself, embrace my culture, and embrace who I look like, embrace my brownness, is the way to do it. I think. I don't think there's I could be wrong, but I don't think there's another way to do it besides embracing yourself.
That makes me think. I'm being the quote guy in this meeting, but the Miles Davis quote. I don't know if you know this quote, but he said, "Man, sometimes it takes a long time to sound like yourself."
Yeah.
And I just have always held on to that. For me, the advice that I'd give is to always define for yourself and remind yourself that definition of what success is. And what I mean by that is I think that by nature of capitalism, by nature of what this country values, by nature of what perhaps our immigrant parents might value, their success can often be easily defined as money. And I think many of us have had this experience. I went years and years and years up until recently. Every single time I'd be like, "Oh, I got this gig. I'm directing this show," and my parents would be like, "Are they paying you for that?" And sure, yes, they were paying me for it, but I think that it's going to be a really hard life to live if the way you define success for yourself as a theater artist is financial. And I think that for me, I define my success as being able to tell stories that are important, being able to tell stories that uplift marginalized communities, being able to tell stories that allow me to share parts of myself. And also I always hold for myself the experience that I had where, like, in school, the closest thing to a story that I related to in media, school, or anything was the Joy Luck Club. And I'm barely Chinese, so I don't totally relate to the Joy Luck Club, but I sure did relate to the Joy Luck Club much more than I related to, say, Catcher in the Rye. And so for me, my success for me and my goal in life is to sort of be an agent for change, to make sure that future generations of people of color, the disabled community, the queer community, like they don't have that experience anymore, that they have access to stories, movies, theater, novels that make them feel seen and heard, and they don't feel like other. So for me, I would say like define what that is for you, because whether like, you know, Jomar and I both have day jobs. Mine happens to be in theater, but even if my day job wasn't in theater, if what I did from 9 to 5 was, say I was a barista, but the art I was doing was exactly the same, I don't think that has anything to do with the definition of whether or not I'm a meaningful artist. That's just how I pay the rent. And I think that is super different from whether or not you're a meaningful artist. So I would say if you want to be an artist, one, do it because it's important that you do it, and B, really define success for you because it doesn't mean money, contrary to what everyone else will say.
Well, both of your answers have been wonderful for anyone who might be listening. And so I think everyone would be interested in finding out about Hold These Truths at Capitol Stage in Sacramento. We certainly know they're interested. So will you have any more adjustments to that? And as far as audience, I know you directed Viet Con there. Is there a difference in approach, audience, demographics, anything like that?
Yeah.
I mean, I think Jeffrey alluded to it earlier. It is a smaller space. It's significantly smaller than SF Playhouse, you know, and in a way that's a great thing, because it can be a more intimate, it could be a more intimate experience for me as well as the audience members. So, you know, technically speaking, I you know, at the Playhouse, I'd have to, project a little bit more because of the space. But at Capitol Stage, I'm excited about how intimate I can be vocally with the audience members who come. Yeah.
Yeah, and sort of to that point in the intimacy of it, like, so like, you know, there are going to be audience like we're going to be as close to the audience as health regulations allow. And for me, and it's going to feel far more like we are in the same room as Gordon than it did in San Francisco Playhouse, where, you know, there's that big stage and there's a little bit of separation there. Whereas at Capitol Stage, you're practically on the same level as the front row. You were on that ground. You're sharing the same floor. And for me, there's a lot of really emotional moments. I mean, you know, you've seen the show, and there's a lot of really intense emotional moments where Gordon is having to push through a lot of grief that he's feeling for himself and his community. And it's going to be really powerful where there isn't that disconnect anymore. He's going to be telling a story to the audience just a few feet away from him. And then they're going to witness this person that they've become friends with go through one of the most traumatic experiences one can imagine. And they're going to sit with him as he takes some time to push through it. And they're not going to be able to be disconnected from that. There's going to be very little room for that. They're just going to sit with him like a friend would, as he is trying to push through and get to the triumph that he eventually gets to in his life.
Well, as I send it back to either you two or Leanne, as far as the actual dates and information, I want to thank you both. I'm a Molly graduate, and you're a wonderful example of what that program has done. Thank you, Jomar. Thank you, Jeffrey. And back to Leanne for whatever you'd like to say. And we need to know about getting tickets and all that. So
I believe, you know, I think there's going to be a road trip coming from the Bay Area up to Sacramento soon. So let's get that bus charter going and and make sure that we go up.
Please stop by after and say hello. I'd love to see you guys.
oh,
Yeah.
So we can't say hi when you're on stage.
I mean, you could. You're that close.
Right. Just don't make any faces. Right. We are so thrilled that you are both here, and please join them on Capitol Stage. I believe I looked at their website. It's going to be live in person as well as on-demand viewing. The dates are going to be, I guess, soft opening on August 25th, but live opening launch is going to be the 28th. So literally a month from today till September 26th. That's capstage.org. So that's going to be wonderful. One thing I want to do is for CATS, we do have this wonderful, if you're an artist, if you're a student, if you're a high school student, college student, we have a Dr. Jerry Inspiration Award. And this is open for all artists. And if you can tell us what it means to be AAPI, you've got till Sunday at midnight to share that with us. Please go to our website at cattheaterasian.org. That would be wonderful. Please, we'd love to hear from you and also reward you for your work. Also, for all the film festival folks out there, our first weekend in October, for 10 days, we're going to be having our 7th annual Silicon Valley Asian Pacific Film Festival. And that will take place, it'll be a hybrid, it'll be on site at this point, as well as online, because we're hedging both bets and hoping that something will be comfortable for you to come out and see the best in Asian American film today. So thank you so much. With that, I'd like to thank Jomar, Jeffrey, Reiko, and everyone who's here and who's listening. Really appreciate your time, and thanks for bringing us home.